Lock the coordinates and keep your eyes on their flank. If Earth even thinks about twitching, I want to see it before their shadow knows it moved. Commander Tarkel Varn didn't bark orders. He carved them. The edges of his voice dug through the bridge's stale air as his crew tightened into position along the central column. Above them, a wraparound heads-up display shimmered with hardline telemetry. Orbital silences, abandoned patrol arcs, dormant colonies barely pinging at baseline. It was a tactical graveyard, and the Norics loved graves. "Movement?" he asked, not turning. "Still nothing, Commander. Cold channels. Same pulse intervals as last cycle," responded the sensor chief, his fingers brushing over a matte surface command pad. "Thermal drift near Vosshaven, minimal, likely asteroid wake." Tarkel's eyes stayed forward. Minimal doesn't mean ignored. He stepped down from the command platform, boots thudding against reinforced deck plates that still smelled faintly of coolant from the last system's flush. He paced. The crew had grown too comfortable in silence, and silence, in his experience, was always prelude. "Earth's been sitting for 11 years, he muttered, mostly to himself. "You think that means asleep?" One of his junior officers, a tactician still wet from academy vetting, answered with too much confidence. "With respect, sir, they haven't deployed, haven't signaled, haven't even run joint drills with Saturn Command. That's not posture, that's power bleed." "Or it's posture you don't understand yet," Tarkel said, sharper this time. "That Helion corridor still has Terran treaty markings. Did anyone here bother reading their Article 9 protocols before we painted over it?" The room froze. On the main board, the corridor glowed dim orange. 6 human colonies dotted the space lane, each ringed in dormant satellite shells and atmospheric stabilizers that hadn't updated signatures in a decade. 4 transit stations flickered, with automated repair loops. No crew confirmed, no weapon systems activated, no transmissions in or out. They looked dead. That was the trap. At the edge of the warboard, a new symbol blinked red. Rift claim. Ascendancy, asset locked. 3 colonies down, the tactician said, lowering his voice now. No pushback, no claims, no response. "They're not watching," Tarkel corrected him. "They're recording, just like they were the day our reclamation crews found that drone planted inside our central fuel reservoir." The bridge fell quiet again, this time not out of discipline, but realization. Out the forward viewport, the planet Virek 2 floated in angled dusk. Its upper cloud band shimmered from the fusion burst of a mining skiff that had landed too hard and fractured its internal shielding. No distress beacon went up. The skiff's pilot didn't make it. But that didn't matter anymore. The system wasn't contested. It was claimed. Officially, the Galactic Forum had labeled Earth as strategically dormant 6 cycles prior. Their presence at interstellar trade summits had become ceremonial at best, absent at worst. High Council seats sat untouched. Defense budget transparency filings stopped completely. Military satellite activity showed a sustained downward trend. It was, by all analysis metrics, a dissolving power. But Tarkel Varn didn't trust metrics. He trusted absences. He trusted how quiet things got before a magnetic mine spun through your hull plating. And he especially trusted how Earth liked to vanish before reappearing at your doorstep without knocking. He turned sharply to the comms desk. "Send word to First Command. Varn advises caution. Corridor status not secure." The young comms officer blinked. "But sir, our advance units have already breached entry node Kappa. They've started rerouting orbital control." "And you think Earth's just going to let that happen?" Tarkel said. "We're not at war because they don't speak. That doesn't mean we've won." The comms tech hesitated. Then his screen flickered. Static lines danced for half a second. Then cleared. "Sir. Correction. The override just halted transmission. I'm locked out." "What of?" Tarkel snapped, striding over. He leaned in, fingers gripping the frame of the console as numbers scrolled briefly across the transmission display. Not Noric's characters, not Ascendancy standard. Ancient formatting. Earth encoding. "Find the source," Tarkel ordered, his voice suddenly low and even. Right now. Trying. But, Commander, it's not broadcasting. The blood in Tarkle's arms cooled. Then, how is it here? Another screen, tactical feedback, blinked on its own. The map of the Helian corridor changed. Slowly. A soft tracking line appeared along the outer ring of the Vosshaven orbital perimeter. Not new. Just revealed. Cold orbit maintenance, no active beacon. 300,000 kilometers from any known Terran colony. An orbital ring previously dismissed as space debris redefined its perimeter. The line sharpened. A docking collar adjusted its status field from unmanned to autocycle ready. 600 meters of layered carbon armor slowly began rotating against shadow. Tarkle's gaze narrowed. How many of those rings did we scan in the last sweep? 32, the sensor officer replied. Rescan all of them. The command room lit up, not with alarms, not with klaxons, with men moving. Chairs scraped. Commands relayed. The silence of confusion turned to the clatter of urgency. On the far side of the system, one of the transit stations flared slightly in the thermal band. Sir, I see it. No distress, no radio, no crew beacon. I said I see it, Tarkle snapped. Start tracking the debris pattern. I want to know if that station blew from the inside or if something hit it from a cold drift vector. The officer worked his board furiously. Drift vector trajectory forming now. Sir, we have irregular wake traces behind one of the decommissioned relay buoys. Estimated mass matches a medium-range orbital engine assembly. Old tech? Tarkeld asked. Dead tech. Not supposed to function without line-of-sight ignition, meaning someone's been lighting them from the shadows. Tarkle took a breath, stepped back from the screen. Then he said the one thing none of them wanted to hear. We never stopped being watched. He turned toward the viewport again. Vyrek 2 spun slowly in the dark. Behind it something moved. Not forward, not fast, just present. Subtle gravitational distortions twisted the light from the nearby stars. There was no broadcast, no warning. But for the first time in over a decade, Earth was adjusting something in the dark and not to speak. Darren Solvak's eyes opened as the stasis seal lifted with a soft hiss, and the cold bit into his skin before the warmth of recycled cabin air crept back in. A thin line of condensation trailed down his cheek as he sat up, the thick sleep gel sliding off his arms like half-melted wax. The pod's internal diagnostics blinked green across the upper panel. No alerts. No malfunctions. Which meant one thing: activation order confirmed. He stepped out barefoot onto the grated floor, the edges biting gently into his soles, grounding him. The chamber lights adjusted to his presence, casting sharp angles against the bulkheads. He didn't speak. There was no one to answer. Around him, a dozen other stasis tubes began their slow cycling, indicators turning from blue to amber. Ghost crew awakening in calculated sequence. Solvak reached for the uniform folded in the sealed locker. It smelled like vacuum-sealed cloth. Clean, lifeless. He dressed quickly, hands moving with practiced economy. The air was dry, still. Each motion echoed slightly in the chamber's architecture, curved and deep like an amphitheater built to house something ancient rather than something functional. He passed under the command arch as the AI core recognized his biosignature. Commander Darren Solvak. A flat male voice acknowledged. Centurion Sleep Doctrine. Phase 1 engaged. Awaiting your command link. He pressed his palm to the embedded node at the center of the arch. The contact was warm. Beneath it, a faint throb. Machine heartbeats. The ship wasn't starting. It had always been awake, simply idle. Override safeties. Elevate to combat prep tier, he said. Confirmed. Lights transitioned from standby white to mission amber. Low-frequency shielding activated through the subdeck with a grinding rumble. Behind the walls, anchor pylons began flexing, warming up stabilization arms, locked in orbit drift positions. Solvak moved toward the forward interface, the main viewplate adjusting to his retinal signature. Before him, nothing moved. Their dreadnought was hidden behind the gas giant Kirath 7, resting inside the orbital shadow of a decaying debris field, a graveyard of old satellite wreckage and mined-out cargo haulers. None of it was operational. That was the point. The debris didn't hide them. They were the debris. He stood still, eyes following the slow trail of light as Kirod's rings drifted in lazy spirals. The stars here felt smaller, compressed. The cold hadn't left his joints, but he ignored it. "Begin thermal wake-up," he ordered. At once, the control panels around him surged with quiet activity. The ship's outer hull panels began flexing, drawing heat slowly from the star-sad shielding and converting it into core battery initiators. Not enough to trip external scans. Just enough to bring muscles back into alignment. "Status of distributed fleet?" Solvac asked, eyes unmoving. "Al-Terran units report, standby readiness. 74% currently initiating subcore activations. Expected full battle readiness in 79 minutes. Supply corridors? Hidden convoys under asteroid drift patterns aligning now. Estimated synchronization with fleet vectors in 4 hours." He nodded once. This was the Centurion sleep doctrine. A response not to invasion but misinterpretation. The doctrine assumed Earth's greatest vulnerability wouldn't come from enemy firepower, but from dismissal. The High Strategic Command had planned for this long before the Forum, labeled Earth, dormant. The plan was simple: remove visibility, allow decay, let the galaxy forget. Cycle in the secondary crews, initiate wake protocols across tiers. Secondary stasis units initiating now. Far below the command ring, automated beds began rising, unfolding silently like arms welcoming their occupants back from an engineered death. Thousands of men frozen in readiness. Not just pilots, code engineers, systems analysts, logistics tacticians. None of them knew where they would wake up, only that they would. Solvac moved across the deck as a soft click followed each step. Behind him, the ship's external armor plates, silent for 11 years, began to stir. Cooling fins extended fractionally, venting condensed gas in narrow ribbons that evaporated before they reached open space. Every action calculated. Every output buried under ambient noise. Synchronized fleet targeting AI feed system maps no active scans. Confirmed. On the display wall, 22 systems lit up one by one, blips barely brighter than the stars they orbited. Dreadnoughts, carriers, stealth units, all positioned years in advance along prearranged gravity shadows. No comm links, no pings, just timers, awaiting a key that had now been inserted. "Show me Helion," he said quietly. The corridor's map bloomed to life. 4 Terran colonies already lost, transit stations marked with hostile occupation bans. Noric signals dirtying the airwaves. Heli moved faster than expected, Solvac muttered. "Should we revise engagement pathing?" the AI asked. He considered. Then, "No, let them settle. The roots go deeper if you give them stillness." He walked back to the main platform and knelt beside a recessed control terminal built into the floor. He flipped open the armored casing and reached for a narrow, metallic key embedded into the structure, one that required manual contact, not biometric swipe. "Authorizing Article 9, he said. The key turned with a mechanical click. All around him, systems began climbing out of their controlled slumber. "Article 9 confirmed," the AI responded. Fleet initiation protocol transferred to active status. Deep in the hull, a tremor ran through the ship, the kind of movement that didn't register as sound, but could be felt through bone and tendon. Like a deep breath being held for far too long. And finally released. He stood. The viewport shifted again. Far in the distance, a tiny glimmer caught his eye. One of the Noric's vessels floating confidently above the outer Helion traffic path. Unshielded, arrogant. "You're going to learn," he whispered, "that we were never gone." Behind him, one of the cryopods clanked open. A man stepped out, gasping, knees buckling before catching himself on the railing. His uniform clung damp against his chest. "Fleet Command?" the man rasped. Solvak turned. "We're back online," he said simply. "You have 30 minutes to suit up. You'll be part of node alignment on the drift sector. Recovering link anchors, no delays." "Yes, Commander." The man saluted and moved to the lockers. More pods opened. Footsteps returned. Water reclamation systems hissed back into function. The command deck filled with new movement. No shouting, no alarms, just structure. And above them, one red eye pulsed across every Terran hull. The Centurion sigil, once just an emblem, now fully illuminated. A reminder that Earth's Armada hadn't been part. It had been stored. The reclaimer drone detached from the underside of the derelict hauler without propulsion, using only rotational torque from its internal gyroscope to drift forward. It latched onto the refueling manifold of Station Zeb 9 with a magnetic bite, its arms settling like claws around the exhaust flange. The connection was seamless. No alerts, no pings, just contact. Inside, the drone's subroutine pulsed once. Lines of code locked into the station's intake valves and issued false pressure readings. The pumps began overcycling. Coolant lines rerouted. The reactor, designed for regulated draw, began heating beyond safety margins. No one noticed. 2 sectors away, 3 more drones, each tagged with the Old Earth Registry A000X, embedded into auxiliary transfer stations near Dalcor Relay. Their cores activated a series of cascading interruptions across fuel routing systems. Supply vessels waiting for top-offs received confirmation of full tanks and departed under false security. Their jump signatures left wakes that bent wrong. Trajectories didn't match pre-flight vectors. In the minutes that followed, one ship clipped a debris belt at 3/4 velocity. Another initiated long-range burn on depleted reserves and collapsed mid-jump, scattering hull fragments into non-mapped territory. On board the Terran dreadnought Halberd 13, Sub-Commander Rourke advanced the operation timeline by 15 minutes. He reviewed the data from 6 shadow fleets without blinking, marking relay towers red one by one. "Visibility," he said, tone level. "We built our answer inside the parts they stopped checking." Earth's goal wasn't to fight ships. Earth's goal was to erase context. Further across the corridor, interceptor units rotated silently behind Noric's cargo haulers, moving toward the Denark holdouts. With no lock-on signal and 0 active targeting systems, they drifted until their optic ranges aligned. At exactly 2:41 station cycle, every interceptor fired a single spike. The spikes weren't weapons, they were signal disruptors, fast-burning compression bursts that shredded relay channels by overwhelming them with contradictory instruction sets. The haulers didn't explode. They veered slightly, lost trajectory, then stabilized, without knowing they were now navigating without correction feedback. The chaos took time to spread. One control tower in Noric's Sector Gamma started issuing contradictory jump codes to outbound freighters. Another tower, responding to ghost beacons that no longer existed, rerouted fuel convoys into already depleted sectors. A communications satellite began broadcasting collision avoidance signals to mining vessels on a 5-second delay. By the time the shift captains noticed anything, it was dismissed as static drift. But one thing spread faster than fire in the void: doubt. On the Noric's defense platform Valor Edict, Captain Thalen stood behind his second officer as station logs flickered across the control display. "We're bleeding throughput on port 17, the officer muttered, confused. "Automated docking doesn't recognize inbound tags. Cargo validation keeps rejecting internal ships." T-Lean leaned in. "Run a deep scan." "We already—" "Run it again," he snapped. The scan returned nothing out of the ordinary, but as they stared at the feed, an inbound hauler slowed mid-approach. Its lateral thrusters fired without command input, bumping it into a defensive pylon. The ship didn't break, but the pylon's beacon stopped transmitting. They waited for the backup relay to engage. It didn't. 37 minutes later, 6 sectors experienced total communication desync. Station officers began writing manual jump routes. Fuel distribution lists were built on projected consumption, but those projections relied on real-time core readings now filtered through drone-fed errors. By the time someone checked the primary source logs, every critical record had already been overwritten with performance averages from 12 years ago. The sabotage wasn't loud. It was complete. Earth didn't broadcast warnings. It planted fractures that looked like operational flaws. Mistakes that passed inspection. Protocols that didn't trigger failsafes because the system didn't know it was compromised. By the time Noric's engineers tried restoring original command structures, entire logistics maps had rerouted themselves toward abandoned dead space. Back aboard Halberd 13, Rourke finalized the status sync. 60% degradation across Noric's support lines, 38% hard disruption. Rest will fail from dependent loop disruption. There, holding a sword with no handle, Commander Solvac stood beside him, eyes locked on the projection. "Do we hit the fleet now?" Rook asked. Solvac didn't respond immediately. His gaze rested on a fuel station slowly spinning without orbital correction. Its tethers snapped, its power cycling endlessly to a now absent tug. "No," he said at last. "We keep severing. Let their weight drag them." Rourke nodded. "How long until they know it's us?" V said. "Daylight already know," Solvac said. "But they'll waste days proving it, and by then they'll be shouting at systems that can't hear them anymore." In the silence that followed, another drone rotated beneath a crippled command tower. Its signature remained masked by reflected radiation from a nearby mining rig. No light. No sound. It latched onto the base's maintenance port and injected an override seed into the core access node. 3 seconds later, the emergency guidance AI began rerouting traffic to phantom gates. The next supply freighter would enter a gate that didn't exist anymore. Operation Barbed Wake wasn't about warships. It was about removing the ability to sustain them. By the end of the second day, Noric's command reported unexplained malfunctions across half their operational sectors. Inter-department cross-checks yielded nothing. Black box data fed conflicting timestamps. Bridge crews found jump paths corrupted by looping calibration files that had never existed in their archives. The grid collapsed not with flames, but with confusion. Supply dried up. Orders lost context. Fuel no longer flowed. And in every lost segment, buried within failed packet strings and disused node directories, sat a single, unchanged line of text. Terran Signal ID. A 00X. The Noric's command cruiser Vectress Blade emerged from fold space above Helion with 3 escort destroyers forming a loose triangle around her. The re-entry sequence was rougher than expected. Trajectory delays, jitter in the grav stabilizers, uneven response from forward thrusters. A common enough error in contested sectors. Captain Sarnvekar barely noticed. His eyes were already locked on the tactical feed. "There's no formation waiting for us," said the nav officer, scanning the telemetry with narrowing eyes. "No Terran grid, no active fleet, no lock-on signatures. We're alone." Bekar didn't blink. "That's not how Earth fights. Recalibrate the display range. Full arc, 10 light minutes." The nav officer hesitated. "We'll lose fidelity at that distance." Lines expanded across the war map. The Helion corridor unrolled like an exposed artery. 6 colonies now dimmed, 3 occupied, 1 recently abandoned. But what unsettled him wasn't the absence of enemy ships. It was the static void between signal markers. Where there should have been interference from defensive shielding or colony feedback loops, there was nothing. No idle power bleed, no orbital positioning data, not even noise from automated miner drones. It was as if someone had scrubbed the air clean. Lieutenant Grell, seated across the command ring, leaned forward with a frown. "Maybe their fleet's deeper inside the corridor, tucked near the moons of Etrivan. We should send a scout." "Scouts disappear here," Vekar replied. "If they were playing dead before, this is the part where they sharpen teeth." The comm station crackled. Receiving report from Strikefang 2, their entry lane shifted mid-jump. They're off course by 4,000 clicks. Spatial drift unaccounted for. "Show their current position," Grell ordered. small blue dot appeared near the outer asteroid cluster beyond Helion 4's orbit. Zoom and clarify, Vakar added. The image enhanced, low fidelity, but clear enough to distinguish outline from shadow. A hull floated just inside the ring, not Noric's, larger, angled. Its surfaces didn't reflect light evenly. The asteroid shadows curved unnaturally around it. Is that one of ours? Grell asked. Vakar studied the image. The silhouette was wrong for any known Noric's design. No visible engine fins, no broadcast antennae, and no shield flare. Just a hull shape and a stillness that implied it was waiting. That's Terran, he said. They're using the field to break up profile scans. We can alert Strikefang. Too late, Vakar cut in. By the time we talk, they'll already have eyes on it. Another officer, this one young, newly assigned from Corps Command, leaned over his console. Captain, we have 2 more anomalies, small movement patterns on opposite vectors. One beneath Helion 6's magnetic pole, one pacing the broken orbital ring of Colony Eta. Run star map comparisons, Vakar ordered. Anything that shouldn't be here. The system parsed. On screen, new lines traced over the sector grid. Then the old star chart, what the Noric's fleet had been using for route planning, flickered. Nearly a quarter of their reference points were now misaligned. Stellar positions didn't match. Several known gravitational reference nodes showed drift inconsistencies. These maps were corrupted, the navigation officer muttered. Not recently, long before this campaign even started. Vakar stood still. How long before? Years. Maybe more, I can't tell. Whoever fed this data to command, they didn't pull from standard observatories. They fed us simulation models. Someone falsified our corridor data? Grell asked. No, Vakar answered. Someone replaced the original and made sure we never noticed. Outside the ship, the light changed. It was subtle. Reflections across debris no longer matched the solar pattern. Something moved inside the asteroid belt, not with propulsion, but with anchored rotation. A warship using mass anchors to pivot without thrust, dragging itself through rock clusters to maintain position without emitting heat. It didn't announce itself. It didn't fire. It just shifted. And behind it, another dark shape slid into a nearby planetary umbra. Then another, angling from above the ecliptic plane. No fleet formation, no central node, just multiple vessels occupying broken paths and crumbling orbits that Noric sensors had dismissed as lifeless. Grell backed away from his screen, breath caught in his throat. There's more than one. They're not grouping, Vakar said slowly. They're bleeding into the map. On the Devran Pike, a destroyer positioned half a sector west, Commander Tarkin Veer stared at his own screen. His voice trembled slightly as he opened a line. Command, this is Devran Pike. We have unknown vessel contact, Dreadnought class, unidentified configuration. It's not responding to signal queries. Fire a warning, his weapons officer asked. No, Tarkin said immediately. Hold all weapons cold. I want confirmation before we provoke anything. But sir, if that ship's real, it was here before us. The Dreadnought's hull shimmered under a thermal spike. For a moment, Tarkin saw it clearly. Markings too old for any active registry. Faded insignia etched into the reinforced underlayer. A forgotten emblem. Earth's twin bar insignia. One side cracked from age, not battle. Then it turned, slowly, silently, bringing its forward face toward the Devran Pike. It didn't fire. It didn't have to. Tarkin's sensor systems began shorting, one by one, not exploding, not frying, just dimming. Power rerouted into loops that made no sense, as if the ship's onboard computer didn't trust its own eyes anymore. The last thing he saw before going dark was the Dreadnought's lower deck opening, not to launch fighters, but to reveal what looked like anchor drones, pulling cables toward the surrounding debris. Sir, the helmsman whispered, they're building something around us. On Vectress Blade, the communications panel flared with internal static. One of the long-dead Terran beacons, thought inoperable for over a decade, began transmitting a data loop. Not a message. Not a threat. Just recorded solar flare readouts from 11 years ago. Over and over. Why would they transmit old weather data? Grell asked. They're not transmitting it, Vikar said grimly. They're replacing it. The tactical feed glitched. Static spread across star markers. Then the feed crashed entirely. Vikar turned from the ruined display. Alibi. They've been here. Longer than us. Probably before we even crossed the border. Captain, the young officer stammered, we need to reposition. No, Vikar said. Repositioning implies we still control movement. He looked out the forward viewing panel. Just black. Motionless. They've already dictated the shape of this battle, we're just discovering it in pieces. Commander Darren Solvac stood alone in the core operations module of Halberd 13. Backlit by overlapping grids that floated across the display wall like veins. Red filters dimmed the lighting across the chamber, casting long shadows from the floor supports, and not a single crewman spoke. This wasn't a discussion. This was execution. Confirm all cross-nodal targeting vectors, Solvac said, voice clipped but steady. Across the deck, officers ran silent verifications, their eyes sweeping through one-time codes and frequency chains. The air inside the command hull felt denser now. Not from heat or atmosphere, but from the weight of what's about to be unsealed. Target locks acquired, one of the control chiefs confirmed. 37 systems. Navigation pylons, long-wave comm towers, orbital stabilizers. Solvac didn't look away from the map. Civilian infrastructure? Excluded. 0 civilian registry confirmed. He reached forward, pressing his palm to the command key. The plates adjusted beneath his skin. Beneath the deck, coils groaned into firing readiness. Plasma reservoirs stirred awake with a deep vibration that rolled through the ship's spinal mounts like a wave pressing against bone. Direct as strain 4, Solvac said flatly. Confirmed. Immediately, the transmission spread through the shadow fleet like a static charge rolling across a steel drum. All pre-positioned Terran warships rotated without synchronized light signals. No traditional comm relays, no alliance codes. Every dreadnought, cruiser, and stealth unit shifted position based on trajectory silence. On board Vectress Blade, Captain Vakar barely had time to react. The command tower outside his portside window flickered. A narrow beam pierced the structure's junction module, severing the tethered pylon from its rotation core. The tower didn't explode. It simply lost shape, falling away from axis as a second shot lanced through the backup control housing and collapsed its internal framework. "The comm ring's down," shouted Grell. "We're blind to Sector 6. Vekar spun to his weapons officer. "Trace origin." "Too many angles. We're reading 15, no, 20 sources." "They're folding position mid-track," another officer said, breath catching. "They're inside our dead zones." A Noric's battleship 2 sectors over. Lorinth spine, lost power, mid-broadcast. Its captain attempted a hard maneuver turn to disengage, firing aft thrusters to reposition for jump alignment. But the core didn't catch. The jump indicators stayed frozen on 88%. On Halberd 13, Rourke observed the flickering readout with narrowed eyes. "They're going to try a burn-through." "They're still using signal pulse verification," Solvac replied. "It won't complete." Seconds later, the Lorinth spine tore apart in a jump sequence collapse. The ship folded itself halfway into a spatial transit corridor before the interference from Earth's mimicry signal fed it phantom exit coordinates. The engines tore out of their housing, dragging the forward decks across dimensional frames that weren't open. The aft ruptured. The ship disintegrated silently, scattering fragments across 3 systems. Rourke didn't flinch. 6 down. "Keep the pattern clean," Solvac said. "No overkill. Every strike must disable, not decorate." Across the corridor, at the edge of Helion 4's upper orbit, an independent Norix cruiser caught the tail end of a Terran-guided rod, fired from a substation buried beneath the crust of a fractured moon. The rod didn't detonate. It punctured through the bridge module, severing helm control. The ship rotated off its planned path and drifted slowly into its own minefield. 3 detonations followed, each one closer, each one unplanned, each one terminal. Back on the Vectress blade, Vecker gripped the console. "We need a fallback vector," he growled. "We've hit the exit lanes," Grell said. "Every jump corridor is under range supervision. We can't move." "What do you mean we can't move?" "We can't align. They're scrambling vector phase integrity. We'd rip our own ships if we try." Vakar turned to comms. "Emergency call to Core Command." "No uplink," came the reply. "Comms are dead system-wide. They started with the outer bands, now nothing's transmitting." From Solvac's position, each Noric's fleet group looked more like pieces falling off a board than ships in command. He watched the chain effect unfold. Station collapses triggering loss of resource coordination, disabled beacons preventing traffic control, internal ship logs corrupted by overwritten data loops. It wasn't a battle. It was detachment by sequence. He turned toward the back of the operations ring. "Tell ground-side support units to begin visual confirmation. I want physical recordings of every drifted vessel and fried relay. No digital relays. Manual optics only." Rourke raised an eyebrow. "You want proof?" "No," Solvac said. "I want memory." As the final series of shots tore through a low-gravity control platform built into the side of Helion stabilizer ring, the sound of structural failure, cracking supports, pressure venting through warp seams, rolled into space like an invisible tide. From orbit nothing looked on fire, but every Noric's ship still floating had lost direction. Their lights blinked irregularly. Their formations fell apart. Even those still technically functional now floated without instruction or unity. Small vessels began drifting toward each other, colliding at angles too shallow to register as attack. A slow collapse of presence. Solvec watched until the screen began to lose power from interference. "Cut feeds. Turn off the board. Let them guess where we are next." Rourke keyed in the last manual override. The battle was over. The story had just begun. Governor Tharos Krell stormed through the central operations tower of the Noric's forward command dome, his footsteps hard and fast, every pace scattering the floor lights beneath him. His staff trailed behind, silent, disoriented, glancing between consoles that had begun displaying code strings none of them recognized. Every line ran in Terran format, outdated, deprecated, yet unmistakably live. "Why is this showing Earth's registry schema?" Krell demanded, turning toward his chief technician. The man's jaw flexed. "It's not a visual overlay, sir. The system kernel just relabeled every admin tier to match their internal file architecture." "Impossible," Krell snapped. "We purged those libraries when we took this corridor. Those files shouldn't even be addressable." People weren't until about 16 minutes ago. Around them, holo terminals blinked into auto-lock. Access prompts shifted from native Noric's language to archived Earth dialect variants. One by one, status boards dimmed, weapon queues vanished, orbital command links unhooked from their original directories, and thermal control layers restructured without user input. Krell reached the main security uplink and slammed his ID into the authorization port. Access denied. Terran authority verified. He stared. A flicker swept across the central display wall. Red banners marking sector occupation status dissolved into static. In their place, a black and white insignia surfaced slowly. The dual-bar Earth crest, faded, cracked, but unmistakably functional. Krell turned toward the comms hub. "Bring up every linked station," he barked. "If we're being spoofed, I want full relay confirmation from all governor seats." The relay officer complied, fingers flying across the panel. He froze. "They're not responding." "Then open a back channel." "There isn't one." "Every emergency net is redirecting to the same packet return address. Non-military routing." Krell's throat tightened. "Where's it redirecting?" The officer hesitated. "Old EarthNet domain, internal sector command chain. It's running through their civilian crisis protocol. Emergency Oversight Variant 9. That file tree was buried decades ago. It's not buried anymore. At that moment, the lighting shifted. Not darker, colder. Every active panel across the operations deck dimmed to a bare minimum before locking into an automated pulse cycle. Access control panels changed texture, the glossy overlay becoming matte black, as if the system refused to reflect Noric's command anymore. An alert screeched across the central tower, system reclassification pending. "Override it," Krell shouted. "Hard boot, physical relay cut, whatever it takes." "Governor," the technician warned, "this isn't a siege. It's a rewrite. They're not breaking our systems. They've already owned them." Krell slammed his fist into the nearest wall port, opening the emergency deck line. Then disconnected manually. A hatch popped. He grabbed the insulated cutter rod and jammed it into the conduit port to kill power. Nothing changed. The lights remained stable. The systems didn't flicker. The terminal's heartbeat continued, as if the severed feed hadn't happened at all. "They've bypassed physical layers," the tech muttered. "We're not running on our infrastructure. They've virtualized the control. They could be miles away, or worse, already on board, and none of this is local." Krell stepped back. His voice dropped. "That's why we've lost planetary shields." The officer at the far end confirmed with a nod. "Every station perimeter failed the integrity scan. Power's available, but the software's been replaced with decoy templates. We're looking at ghosts." On the station Arcus Vault, orbiting Helion's sixth moon, a similar event unfolded. Local administrators watched as their planetary defense console reverted to a recovery protocol written in Terran syntax. It began routing command priority to a legacy source that didn't exist in the system anymore. Earth Command Archive Node 1. Attempts to block the override failed. Terminal after terminal began cascading through privilege reclassification. Noric's clearance badges were rejected. Formerly operational systems began prompting for biosignature revalidation. Ekin standard format only. Within minutes, the communications grid across the corridor defaulted to a new master directory, one absent from all current Galactic Forum charts. Its command code was short, brutal, absolute. A 9-Force Territorian. Author keychain. Then came the lockout. Every Noric's orbital asset in the Helion corridor, docking platforms, supply chain station nodes, shut down simultaneously. All interface panels returned a single result when queried. Autonomous control, system surrender in effect. And then a quieter horror crept in. Across dozens of command chambers, systems began replacing local governor designations with placeholder Terran titles. Not in protest, not in mockery, in confirmation. Governor Krell stood before a blackened console, now looping a silent broadcast. An orbital signal, previously buried in forgotten Terran protocols. Its final line repeated like clockwork. This facility now operates under enforced Terran continuity mandate. Unauthorized inputs will be logged and erased. Across the galactic net, communications routed through the forum's secured public lattice began triggering redirection alerts. Users attempting to interface with Noric's sectors received the same message. Assets denied. Legacy proof. Panic bloomed in places Earth never touched. Galactic infrastructure analysts scrambled to determine if the override was kinetic, viral, or embedded. Forum analysts reviewed protocol logs and discovered the worst truth imaginable. The Terran trigger key had been embedded before Noric's occupation, possibly years earlier. On the bridge of Halberd 13, Rourke studied the readouts from recovered satellite feeds. One after another, sectors returned to Earth control, not by fleet dominance, but by default system hierarchy. "Epi didn't destroy their colonies," he said. "They encoded their return." Salvok didn't respond immediately. He let the screen flash through another dozen recovery pings before offering a quiet sentence. "You don't reclaim land by fighting over it. You reclaim it by never letting go." He stepped forward. "Mark the corridor as locked. Strip all external comm paths. No rebuttals. Let them choke on the silence." Rourke gave a tight nod. "And the governors? They're not governors anymore. In every Noric command center, leaders now stood in front of machines that no longer recognized their authority. There were no shots, no fire, no uprising. Just the slow realization that they were never in control. Earth hadn't taken back the corridor, but it had never left. At 317 standard cycle, the final Noric cruiser crossed the threshold of Helian space. Its signal transponder flickered erratically before stabilizing to the default neutral band. It did not broadcast a farewell. It did not signal retreat. It simply shifted registry from active operation to transit mode. 3 hours earlier, the corridor's core jump lanes were flooded with overlapping withdrawal vectors. No formation, no escort, no exit strategy, just layered departures, scrambled and irregular, each vessel trying to escape before the next node failed to recognize its command key. Governor Tharos Krell stood alone inside the echoing control hall of Station Draxus. His staff had long since evacuated. The black display wall no longer blinked. It didn't even glow. A thin layer of dust had begun collecting around the outer console frames. He hadn't noticed until he wiped a streak across the comm panel with the back of his wrist. He tried again to trigger the manual broadcast, speaking into a mic socket that had reverted to a disabled status page. Command request, re-verify sector control, governor-level clearance, authorization, Krell 4B. No response. He leaned closer. Terran systems. If this is automated, I am not your enemy. My jurisdiction was procedural. I didn't start this. I just obeyed policy. Still nothing. Then the panel lit. One phrase. Assume active. Across the galaxy, the Forum Hall chamber in Cadrenis Core filled with 12 heads of state and 4,000 delegates. Their voices low, their expressions unreadable. The emergency session had been called before dawn. The Helian incident had fractured not just borders, but assumptions. High Senator Dyrol Sest stepped to the main lectern. His aged features twitched as he lifted the advisory file in trembling fingers. The Noric's ascendancy has filed for unilateral disengagement from all Earth claims sectors. No negotiations requested, no terms offered. They've classified the corridor as non-navigable, under current protocol conflict. He looked up. Earth has not responded to any communication, not with threats, not with confirmation, not even with acknowledgement. Whispers spread across the platform levels. Senator Halvin Tross of the Yar Dominion rose from his seat and addressed the quorum directly. This chamber dismissed Earth. For over a decade we labeled them dormant. We mocked their silence. Now the corridor is gone and no one knows if they've finished, or if they've only begun. From the audience deck, representatives from 3 different systems demanded immediate engagement. Calls for diplomatic teams, technological review boards, and emergency boundary commissions. But the speaker AI refused to finalize any of their votes. It returned a simple error. Unable to establish handshake with Terran relay systems, contact source is unavailable. In the trade ring at Vale Station, merchant convoys attempting to reschedule routes through Helian were denied docking clearances at 8 separate hubs. Traffic control returned blank logs. Satellite connections failed certificate verification. Every system along the corridor denied access. Not with a warning, but with embedded route cancellations traced back to a timestamp no one could explain 16 years prior. Station Master Roel Voss sat hunched over his back office panel, watching the same satellite loop play on a private channel. A single Terran relay buoy, spinning slowly in orbit over the Etrivan belt. No audio, just a monochrome readout broadcasting the same command line. Assume active. His comms aide stepped in. Should we attempt a bypass? Voss didn't turn. No. We move, trade, 2 sectors outward, permanently. There's nothing left to negotiate. On the bridge of Halberd 13, Rourke looked up from the command console. They're gone, all of them, not even drone scouts left behind. Solvac didn't shift from his stance at the observation deck. Fleet condition stabilized. All systems reverted to sleep posture. Command AI has initiated interval freeze. External scans show no power signatures detectable. Beyond our hull shelling. Good. Pull the last relay trigger. Rourke hesitated. We won't be able to reach them anymore. Not even our own sleeper nets, Solvac replied without pause. He turned his head slightly, enough to glimpse the corridor edge from the viewport. Faint stars. Cold silence. No movement. And yet, everything had changed. They won't follow us into the dark, he said. What happens if they do? Solvac's reply was so quiet it barely reached. They'll remember why they stopped the first time. Down below, Earth's satellite network continued to pulse along its silent cycle. Relay nodes, long forgotten by galactic cartographers, began looping back into low-power alignment, forming a quiet perimeter that didn't pulse with threat or welcome. They simply existed. Undeniable, From the outer colonies to the central rings, freight captains, exo-traders, and private relays began updating their navigates. Not with instructions, but with new legends. Maps that once labeled Helion as open trade zone were revised. In corridor, restricted Terran monitored. No beacons guarded the lanes, no ships patrolled the entries. Earth had said nothing. And somehow, that said everything. The merchant vessel Far-Reach Fayeen drifted into orbit over Reshk Prime's outer dockyard, its navigation system loaded with new updates. Darren Mal, a cadet on his first route dispatch, sat in the back of the control module reviewing cargo charts, while his senior pilot adjusted the long-range beacon alignment. The data stream paused, then stalled. "Why'd the route cut?" Derian asked, leaning forward. The pilot didn't speak. He tapped twice, ran a bypass, then exhaled slowly. "You're looking at it wrong," he muttered. "It didn't cut. The nav suite just skipped a full sector." Darren blinked. Skipped? The senior officer rotated the projection toward him. The galactic route maps stretched across the screen. Every lane intact. Until the section once labeled Helion Corridor appeared. Except, it didn't. The space was still there, physically, geographically, but the label had changed. Operational status, unknown. Recommended detour. No warning, no threat tags. Just a gap. Emptier than abandoned sectors, more final than red zones. "They used to say Earth's fleet was sleeping," the pilot said, voice hollow. Turns out it wasn't asleep, it was hiding in plain sight. In the Galactic Forum's central archive chamber, the vote concluded. Out of the 200 seats, 194 voted in favor of Earth's reclassification. 6 abstained. No one objected. The new directive read, "Sol System systems do not attempt contact unless authorized by primary relay node. Status, autonomous enclave. Tactical positioning, inconclusive. Operational assumption, active." The words would enter diplomatic lexicons, station policy briefs, and military advisories across every major quadrant. Quietly, without debate, they replaced doctrines 3 generations old. Trade lanes would reroute. Exploratory licenses would be denied. Colonization permits would be rejected without appeal. Not because of an active war, because of the risk of reawakening something that never slept. Back on Halbert 13, Rourke stood at the tactical console for the last time before the blackout protocol took full effect. "We've shut every outbound system except passive drift monitoring," he said, reading the final line out. Solvac nodded slowly. He rested one palm on the internal seal before the command deck. "No more broadcasts," he said. "You think they'll come back?" Rourke asked. "They'll remember." "Is that enough?" Solvac's eyes didn't shift. "They thought we were dormant. They treated silence as surrender. They forgot that stillness isn't weakness, it's a position." He stepped back. The lights across the command ring faded in layers, casting long shadows along the support rails and anchor beams. One final switch clicked beneath the deck, and the last onboard transmitter went dark. Orbiting above the corridor's edge, Earth's fleet hung in absolute stillness, each hull camouflaged into asteroid drift patterns, thermal outputs masked behind deflective plating. They had returned to quiet formation, not because they needed to hide, but because they had already won. In every system Earth once touched, remnants of overridden protocols persisted. Relay keys, buried in cargo routes, passive AI triggers inside abandoned dockyards, registry reroutes, waiting in cold files. The infrastructure had not been rebuilt. It had been waiting, and now it watched. Across the Yar Dominion's Central Military Academy, cadets studied new star charts. An entire lecture block had been rewritten with an advisory tag: "Do not engage sole source structures without diplomatic clearance from 3 verified channels." A student in the back raised his hand. "Why not just clear the corridor with a combined strike?" The instructor turned. His gaze was flat. Because last time someone thought that way, their command systems reclassified themselves without notice. Their ships drifted until the stars no longer registered. Their logs ended before their orders were even processed. Another cadet spoke. "What happens if Earth decides to move again?" The instructor closed the terminal. "They don't need to move, they're already embedded." On an abandoned Terran satellite drifting near Helion's Ghost Gate, the old Earth insignia, faded, half-buried under impact scoring and radiation pitting, remained partially visible. The relay light blinked at slow intervals. "Assume active." That phrase would never be decoded fully. The syntax was out of date. The signal formatting didn't match any current standard, yet it remained universally understood. A warning with no threat. A presence with no introduction. A myth that didn't explain itself. The myth of the sleeping Armada had ended. It was never asleep. It had been watching through old eyes, listening through abandoned ports, calculating through obsolete systems that no one ever thought to disconnect. Earth had not returned to prove strength. It had risen once to demonstrate restraint. And every star around Helion dimmed slightly, not from shadow, but from distance. A distance no one dared cross again, because some maps are not forgotten. Some are erased for safety. Would you erase your name from every system if it meant Earth would never be invaded again? Drop your answer in the comments and tell us what kind of tactic, fleet doctrine, or long-buried contingency you'd add to humanity's galactic arsenal. Like, subscribe, and stay alert.